What is up, Leafs fam? This is the Leafs Convo. I am Norman James. May the 4th be with you, by the way. Really? Don't you think it's a bit much? Have you seen the trends on Twitter? May the 4th laid out in all these different ways of typing it, and those little Chewbacca emojis, I like those. But honestly, it's just getting a little bit too much. Star Wars is all over the place. Even though I have a Star Wars podcast on Anchor, I think it's a little crazy. I gotta go finish that one up after this. The Marlies beat the Crunch 6-4 in game 1 of their second round series. Mike Augello was at that game. We're gonna join him momentarily. We're also gonna look back on that Gus Katsaros interview, the Leafs Convo. If you haven't heard it, listen to this first, then click the YouTube links and check it out. Great conversation, great information from that wonderful hockey analyst that is Gus Katsaros. The Leafs Conversation with Mike Augello starts now. This is the Leafs Convo. I'm Norman James, along with Mike Augello. The Marlies were dominant during the regular season. Is there an expectation they should be dominant during the postseason?
Well, I think entering the postseason there was, but they had a difficult time playing against Utica. They ran into a hot goaltender in Thatcher Demko, who's probably the Canucks' future #1 goalie, and they lost 2 games in Utica, and they had the best road record in the AHL last season. So the expectation was that they would beat Utica fairly easily, but it went to a 5th game. And, the expectation in this series is that, they win the first 2 at home and then they go to Syracuse and, take care of business there. But again, they lost 4 to Syracuse, and this is last year, and this is a different team. If you look at their roster as compared to last year, like 5 or 6 key players are either playing or are healthy scratches for the Lightning right now against the Bruins. So, this is a different team and a younger team, and their head coach Benoit Gruel basically said, they're not young anymore. They've played 80 games, but they're young. And the Marlies need to take advantage of the fact that guys like Yanni Gourde and Corey Conacher and Jake Dotchin are not playing for the Crunch, that they're playing for the Lightning.
How many guys from the Leafs came back to the Marlies to help with this run?
2, Dermott and Janssen. And Kapanen, they had put him through that waiver. They'd sent him down and recalled him at the trade deadline to make him eligible, but after going through the Calder Cup playoffs a couple years in a row, and he had an invite to play for Finland in the World Championships, they allowed him to go to play for his country at the World Championships in Denmark.
So it's not like an influx of Maple Leafs rejoining the Marlies roster has thrown it off kilter or anything like that. It's just you're in the playoffs now. Everything's a little bit more intense. Everything's moving a little bit quicker. Everybody's a little more tired, and the Marlies are facing a challenge, but so far, I mean, they're leading their second round series 1-0, and I don't know in any circumstance where you see a team that's dominant during the regular season just cruising through the playoffs as well.
Yeah, they're gonna face some adversity, and they already have. And maybe losing 2 games in Utica was the wake up call that the team needed. I mean, they had an answer for everything last night, but it was, like I said, it was not a game that they could feel, comfortable about. They weren't home and cooled out in the middle of the second period. It was a nip and tuck seesaw battle that even when they got up 2 goals in the third period and scored a goal late to what they thought iced the game away, Syracuse came back, scored with 6 attackers with 1 minute and 5 seconds left to go, and then the Marlies scored an empty net goal, but they could never really breathe against Syracuse, and that's probably what's going to happen in the rest of the series.
This is the Leafs Convo. Norman James along with Mike Augello. If you're listening to us through Anchor or iTunes or Google Play, thank you so much. We'd also like your patronage on our YouTube page, so please check that out as well. It's essentially the same thing with a Leafs Convo slate. We'd like you to like and subscribe to the page, leave a comment while you're there. We're trying to build this thing every single time Mike and I collab for a discussion. When you watch the Marlies, Mike, and somebody does something, whether it's score a goal or a big play, do you always check to see on the roster who that is and how that particular player may apply or be applicated to what the Maple Leafs are trying to do down the line?
Well, I mean, being somebody who covers the Leafs on a daily basis, I pretty much know who these players are. I mean, like a guy like Pierre Engvall, who has been very impressive since joining the Marlies late in the regular season after playing for HV71 in the Swedish Hockey League. I was, Engvall was on my radar from the time that he was drafted 7th round in 2014. And, the fact that, he was playing in the SHL for a number of years, and he played at the rookie development camp and some of the rookie tournament games. So him coming over this year, I was aware of it, and I knew that they face a decision with him about whether he is somebody they want to sign to an entry level deal, and like based on the way he's played, that's definitely going to happen because he's a 6'4", 200-pound slick skating winger with good finish, and he almost scored a point per game late in the regular season, and last night he scored his 3rd goal in 8 games in the playoffs. So this is a guy who might be, a couple years down the road, another Andreas Janssen, who plays a couple years in the AHL, builds his strength up, builds his, familiarity to North America, and could be on the radar for the Leafs going forward.
Remember 3-4 years ago when the Leafs were at their bottom and the Marlies were the team that you'd go to for solace? The Marlies are still a team that can provide one with a lot of excitement and a lot of hope, but the Maple Leafs team now that a lot of these Marlies are trying to graduate to is pretty darn good in and of itself. Do you watch the way the Marlies play and you see the way that Sheldon Keefe runs the game plan? Is there anything there at Rico that you would like to see move north to Air Canada Centre in terms of a structure, game style, or anything like that?
Well, first of all, the difference from, say, 2012 when they got to the Calder Cup final and even a couple years after that and now is the fact that those teams were essentially a bunch of AHL veterans. It was like, guys like Mike Zigomanis, a number of, there were, in 2012, Kadri was on that team, Gardner was on that team, but Leo Komarov was on that team, but it was mostly a lot of, and Komarov came in 2013, but most of the players on that 2012 Calder Cup final team were veteran AHLers. There was not a lot of youth. The difference here is there are some AHL vets, but the core group are the youngsters. You've got Liljegren, Grundstrom, Engvall, Janssen, Dermott. It's draft picks and some free agent signings that they brought in, and they're complemented by the veteran guys. So I think in terms of what is, potentially going to head down Lakeshore Boulevard to the ACC on Bay Street, you're going to see some of these young guys. Liljegren will probably be on the Leafs within 2 years. I think Grundstrom's got a good chance of making the Leafs next year. I think Janssen is on the Leafs, and so is Dermott. So they're churning that engine in terms of young players and feeding it to the Leafs, and that's the direction that the Marlies are going, and the Leafs organization is going.
I got to think you're watching the games, you're conversing with others in the press box or even with fans or whomever. If you can get in and out of Rico without causing a major stir, we know you are a celebrity, Mike. But when you do get a moment of peace and quiet and you can actually discuss hockey with somebody, you must, fantasize or think ahead to how some of the main pieces at Rico would fit in with the core group on the Maple Leafs, right?
Well, like a guy like Janssen, even though he's a completely different type of player, style of player, I think Janssen is the replacement for James Van Riemsdyk. He's not a fourth line guy. He's got a high skill set. He scored almost 30 goals in the American Hockey League this year. He made a difference. I think he had a goal and 2 assists in Game 5 against Utica. He had a little bit of an error yesterday on a shorthanded goal where it was one of those drop passes on the power play that he sort of fumbled, and Matthew Joseph of Syracuse scored. But he's young, he's still young, but he's coming at the end of his entry level deal. He's probably not going to be too expensive to sign to a 2 or 3 year bridge deal, and that is a guy that's highly skilled and might be somebody who can play with a Kadri or play with a Matthews. So I think he's a top 6 or top 9 forward.
Are you on a ship somewhere? Because that sounds like a tugboat horn. Do you hear that?
No, somebody's texting me. I'm sorry. It just happens. I can't. Of course, it happens when I'm on a phone call and doing an interview, and never stops.
Well, my wife will continually text me about ridiculous stuff. What's for dinner tonight? Did you trim the backyard? And I'm like, come on now. I'm recording a podcast through the Anchor app, and you're disrupting what I'm trying to do. And then I get 3 more texts. Oh, okay, I'm real sorry. We'll talk later. It's like,
right.
We've got this. Mike and I certainly have this. This is the Leafs Convo. I'm Norm James, along with Mike Augello. Mike, did you listen to our interview with Gus Katsaros from yesterday? Did you get a chance to, sift through some of the knowledge that he brings?
I did, and Gus is always very knowledgeable, and I enjoyed and agreed with some or most of his takes. I think that one of the things when he was talking about the Boston-Tampa series and looking at how it compared to the Leafs series against the Bruins, you can see what the Leafs lacked by what the Lightning are doing. There's pushback from the Lightning. There, you have a guy like Kevin Miller slamming somebody into the boards, and a guy like Yanni Gourde, who's a feisty, smallish player, pushes back, hits back, fights back. And I didn't think that there was enough of that. And Gus said it, there was not enough of those players like Zach Hyman and Connor Brown to augment the skill on the Leafs. And I think that is one of the things that Kyle Dubas, Mark Hunter, or whoever's the Leafs GM is going to have to address. I mean, I love skill. I think skill is the most important thing for a team to win, but you have to augment it with guys who go into the corners and guys who will bloody somebody's nose if you get pushed around. And I think one of the things that the Leafs have to address is you can't have your toughness on the fourth line or sitting in the press box. It's got to be somebody who can play in the top 9 and also hold another team accountable. And I think that is going to be something that Kyle Dubas or Mark Hunter has to address this summer.
Well, they lost the series to the Bruins in 7 games. They made it interesting. They tantalized a lot of their fans. Even in game 7, they were up 4-3 going into the third period, right? But yes. you hopefully in this loss, there is a lot of learning to be done. And I mean, that's certainly an important thing, because if you can't learn from your failures, you're never going to succeed fully. And the Maple Leafs are at least on a track right now that you could project may end with them being right there on the precipice of winning a Stanley Cup if they play their cards right and if they manage this thing right. And it's not necessarily just about managing what's on the ice right now, because it's not slim pickings in this organization. There's a lot to pick from. There's money to play with. You can go on about salary cap, but the Leafs have tons of cash, and they can do things to open up more space in one department, or just be innovative in the way they want to spend their money. So it's not about that. A lot of it might just have to do with what's going on in the boardroom right now, and making sure that everybody, a decision's made on the general manager, how the structure of decision will be laid out, and make sure that you have everybody on the same page. Because if there's no harmony in the place where the decisions come down, and where you really need to sort of project a harmony, project a cohesiveness, if there's nothing going on there, everything else below it, just won't be calibrated right. So this is a very important time for the team on the ice, but I think just as important in the boardroom right now. And I'm confident it'll sort itself out. Nobody's looking at Kyle Dubas as some petulant goof, or Mark Hunter as a guy. He might be a bit aloof or socially awkward, but the man, you can consider him a genius in terms of the way he's put teams together and drafted players, and the man, he's a savant in that regard. So I hope these guys can stay on the same page, and I also hope, and this is, I'm not Mike, I'm not worried that there's going to be friction here, but I hope that Mike Babcock has learned as much from this recent experience as his players, as the fans, as the organization. Mike, you are a legend coaching wise. You've done a lot of great things, But this is a different animal now, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on you going forward. And I really do hope that man has enough modesty within to say, if I need to make some changes, and the changes are kind of spearheaded or propelled by the guy ahead of me, whether it's Kyle Dubas or whomever, I'm going to go for that because I want to make the change here, and I want to go and get to the plateau, and that's a Stanley Cup with the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, I mean, the relationship, if it is Dubas, the relationship between Dubas and Babcock is going to be a key going forward. If it's one of those things where Babcock thinks he can push the young guy around and you need to get me this guy, then I don't think it's going to work. I hope that first of all, I think if it is Dubas, he's going to have the backing of Shanahan, and Shanahan is going to say, okay, well, this is going to have to work. And, by that, he needs input, and it's going to be a cooperative type of thing. But going back to another thing that Gus said that I thought was very accurate was the fact that not only does this team need to improve on the blue line, but the team defense, especially the forwards, being able to come back and combat in the defensive zone is an important development that needs to happen over the next couple of years for this team to be better. I mean, it's not simply just the defense has got to improve, because I think that's short-sighted. Yes, the defense needs to improve. They need, I think, at least 2 top 4 defensemen, but the forwards have to come back and can't. You have to have William Nylander. You have to have Kasperi Kapanen and Andreas Janssen. You need them to come back and get the puck from the opposition in the defensive zone and turn it the other way. You see teams like Boston. They create offense by guys like Bergeron and Marchand stealing the puck off the stick of the opposition in the offensive zone and going the other way. And that's one of the things that the Leafs will need to improve on. But all in all, I mean, it's going to be getting those defensemen. And I don't, by hook or by crook, they need, I think, at least 2 top 4 defensemen for this team to be a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. And I don't know if that can occur in one summer, but that's the goal, and that has to be the goal.
This is the Leafs Convo. I'm Norman James in London, Ontario. Mike Jello in his penthouse in Manhattan. Mike, thanks for joining us. Weren't you supposed to be on the Air Force 2 with Trump? Where are you guys heading down to Florida, or what's going on?
No.
I'm kidding.
Or am I? Not associated with that guy at all.
Or am I? Look, if the team agrees to play a defensive-minded game, and that is an order, or that is a decision made not just by Mike Babcock and his staff, but that is something that Kyle Dubas is in cahoots with. Brendan Shanahan clearly wants them to play that game. Sheldon Keefe has a certain strategy that's similar, that's being employed at Rico. Then this isn't about pointing fingers at the coach for alienating players who are just not assimilating to the game plan. This is about the players having to adjust their game and focus on playing the right way as a team. So say William Nylander becomes kind of the black sheep and somebody who you might feel like is being mistreated by the coach because he's just not playing that kind of game. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. Then it's not about Babcock being that gruff old man and treating the youth wrong. This is about somebody like William Nylander not being able to play the kind of structure that is mandated by the organization. Mitch Marner is going to do it because he came up through that system. And if Mitch Marner can do it, William Nylander can do it. And then at the end of the day, you're hoping that Austin Matthews will be able to agree to that kind of style and thrive in that kind of style. And as an example for everyone else, because if your de facto captain, if your best player is buying in and is trying to make it work, then if you're not, then there's a serious problem here. So clearly, if you want to go all the way, you have these offensive stars, but you have to be a defensive. You have to have that defensive-minded team game. All 3 zones, 200 feet. I sound like the Hunters, but that's what is going to have to happen. And my question for Gus was, do the Maple Leafs, with all of this star power, all of this offensive star power, have the proper personnel to actually execute that kind of game plan? And it sounds weird because you want all these good players, right? But do you have the right good players to put into this, into these roles and succeed?
And I think In part, they do. I don't worry about Marner. You can see like late in the season, it wasn't just that he was super creative offensively and making plays that were just incredible. I mean, defensively, I remember one game where, it was a breakaway and on going the one way, and he back checked and stole the puck from the player who was on the breakaway. I mean, that he is defensively aware and defensively responsible and offensively creative at the same time. That's what makes him a potential superstar. Matthews is a guy, because the guys who his role models are Anze Kopitar and Jonathan Taves. It's not guys who are one zone players. No. He buys into the defensive aspect of the game, but I think that buy-in, that has to be adopted by a number of players. And see, that's why I think Babcock, he always gravitates towards the veteran guys like a Plekanec, like a Nazem Kadri, who has, honed his defensive skills over the last couple of years, like Leo Komarov, because he knows that they will combat at both ends of the ice. And what he needs are some other young guys. I mean, he didn't get that out of Tyler Bozak and James Van Riemsdyk. They're sort of one-dimensional players and one-zone players, but they need that out of everybody on that roster to be successful.
Mike, I hate to keep going on about the Hunters, and I've been accused of being a Hunter lapdog. My relationship with the Hunters has never been a good one. It's always been terse but professional, and when they needed us, we would do something for them, knowing that the byproduct would be coverage and content. And then when we needed them, it would happen sometimes and it wouldn't. But I call a spade, man, and I don't care if we have a good relationship or not. These guys are hockey geniuses, and for the most part, the kids that they have sent off into the NHL are well-prepared hockey players. You cannot tell me William Nylander and Austin Matthews could pound for pound have more upside than Mitch Marner, but neither of them was more well-prepared to play in this league than Mitch Marner. Mitch Marner is just he's a naturally gifted hockey player. The guy, wasn't necessarily he was a star coming up through the ranks, but he was never the top guy because of his size. And again, we bought into that whole, size could be a hindrance for him, and he's proved us wrong too. And I'm glad he has. But again, the Hunters have been able to groom players and get them ready for the next level. They prepare them like professionals at the junior level. And that's why we're seeing Mitch Marner be who he is. He just he has no shut-off valve. He just goes, and it's not just about being reckless or crazy or trying to be, foolish with the puck. He knows when he doesn't have the puck, he's got to play his ass off. And that's one of the reasons why, go back and watch that 2016 Memorial Cup team. They were unbelievable, but they played from their end to the other end, and they were fantastic. And, you're going to get the Rob Schremps out there who didn't necessarily jive with what the Hunters wanted to begin with, or a Nazem Kadri who was brought in via the Steve Mason trade. And, he was kind of freewheeling a bit, but Kadri got his act together. And a lot of the roots of knowledge and the teaching that he was provided by the Hunters were reignited after the Leafs gave him a kick in the pants. So what I'm saying is, you've got a guy like Marner, and he's had that training. He's had that advantage over somebody like Matthews and Nylander, and it's now for these guys to it's the onus is on them to take their games to the next level, because they're beautiful players, they're amazing players. Just a couple more things for you. Gus Katsaros seems to think that the Leafs should go all in on John Tavares if they so choose to, because hey, why not? Is that, and I asked him if there was a redundant offensive quality on this team, if there could be such a thing, but they've got a lot of offensive stars, and they're going to have some contractual issues coming up with lots of money to spend on just a few players. How does a John Tavares added to the mix help hurt the contractual situation, the financial situation, and also kind of convolute what's going on the ice in terms of who gets the puck?
Well, I think that if the Leafs do go after John Tavares and Austin Matthews are represented by the same agent, by the same firm, there would have to be a negotiation in concert for both players, simply because Austin Matthews is your franchise cornerstone. Tavares is also a franchise cornerstone. You would love to have that 1-2 combo like Pittsburgh has with Crosby and Malkin. but you're probably going to have to say, okay, well, we're going to pay Austin $11 million a year. If to get John Tavares, you may have to pay him the same $11 million a year. It's not the most that they could get. Matthews could top McDavid's offer, but to make that combo work, to get both of them signed for long term, that may have to be something. And there are benefits of being in Toronto in terms of advertising, things of that nature. So that could work. But the other effect, if they actually go after Tavares and they try to sign him, is you're probably going to have to move out a guy like William Nylander, because you simply can't afford, maybe you can afford him on a bridge deal. Maybe you could have to wait 2 years down the road before you have to make that decision, but you're not going to be able to pay Kadri. Well, Kadri's making 4.5. You're not going to be able to pay Matthews, Tavares, Marner, and Nylander. It would just be too top heavy, and you have to pay for a defenseman or 2 defensemen. So there would be changes if they got in on the Tavares sweepstakes, but I think that would be a move that would be beneficial to the Leafs, and it's possible, but it all depends on whether Tavares wants to play in Toronto, and I don't know about that.
Well, that remains to be seen, and then we have to assume there's going to be a discussion amongst the Leafs brass as to what strategy they want to take going forward, and that will benefit the growth of this team as it moves towards being a totally legit contender for the Stanley Cup. Does it make more sense to continue to grow from within and use their dollars a little more wisely, or make that splash? It's not like the Maple Leafs need to sell more tickets, and John Tavares would help himself in a lot of circumstances, but does the team would sell more jerseys, I suppose, but it's not like this team needs to make a splash in free agency in order to reinvigorate the fan base. So there are going to be a lot of questions that need to be answered in the very near term, because July 1st is just around the corner. It'll be interesting times ahead. And I think when you say we know that the team would be confronted with the cold, hard reality of having to pay guys, who are they going to keep? Well, do you really have to pay all those guys? Is William Nylander destined to be a Maple Leaf for his entire career? Maybe he becomes a superstar somewhere else, and when he's retired or he's accepting his Hall of Fame ring, he can look back and say, thanks to the Leafs for giving me the start. Maybe that's his career path. His career will really take flight in another organization. Maybe it doesn't. I'm just throwing that out there. But to think that everybody you have with now are the guys that you have to keep paying and you have to retain in order to go forward is foolish. It just doesn't work that way. Look at the Blackhawks. They won their first cup with a group, and then some guys fell off. Some guys were moved out in order to accommodate the cap situation. They brought in a secondary group, and then they won 2 more cups. It's kind of, that's just sort of the way she goes, right, Mike? Last word to you. Got to wrap her up.
Yeah, I mean, there'll be difficult decisions down the road, and decisions that'll have to be made of who to keep and who not to keep. As you said, like the Blackhawks have done, like the Kings have done, teams that win Stanley Cups, they have to make those tough decisions. But, and maybe they lock themselves in on Tavares and maybe don't have as much flexibility if they do make that big move. But I don't think this is about splash. I think it's about the reality that a team that's going to win needs 2 really good centers up the middle. Anaheim has Getzlaf and Kessler. Pittsburgh has Crosby and Malkin. You need that strength up the middle. And if you have a 1-2 punch of Matthews and Tavares, I mean, that makes. I'm sure that'll make Mike Babcock salivate at the prospect. And then Kadri at $4.5 million as your number 3 center. I mean, that's
getting pumped up, man.
Yeah. There you go.
You're pumping me up, Mike. Hey, thanks for everything you do. We're looking forward to more Marlies Crunch coverage. Tell the Donald I said hi and hopefully bye in the relatively near term. And the most important thing of the day, Mike, may the 4th be with you.
Thank you, Norman.
Have a good one, buddy.
All right, we've got to fly real quick. Crunch, Marlies, Game 2 at Ricoh Coliseum. It's a 4 o'clock puck drop. The Marlies up 1-0 in the series. It's lots of fun to watch these cats do their thing. at the minor league level and have aspirations to go to the big time and actually make it happen. And then down the line, we can say, hey, you know, we watched these dudes win a Calder Cup together, get that championship feeling together, and bring all of that great energy over to Air Canada Center to help the Leafs take that next step. It's amazing stuff. Mike Augello will be covering the Marlies crunch for a lot of outlets, including the Leafs Convo. Please go to the YouTube page right now, like and subscribe, leave a comment while you're there. We are blowing up big time, and it's really all because of you. You're supporting us, and it means so much. At I Am Sports Heart on Twitter, that's how you can follow me. I don't have a lot of followers right now because I'm locked out of my old account, which had tons of followers and is losing them daily. And at the end of the day, that's kind of a vain thing to even worry about. But all I'm trying to do is just spread the message and the positivity we try to send out through this podcast. Hashtag the Leafs Convo. We're on Anchor, iTunes, Google Play, and of course, the mothership, YouTube. For Mike Augello, I'm Norman James. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.